Speed up the inheritance. I'm putting everything in my name," Victoria whispered as the funeral director lowered the casket. I froze mid-step, the echo of her words cutting through the murmurs of mourners. The floral arrangements seemed suddenly excessive, almost gaudy, their scent sharp against the still air of the small chapel. I adjusted my navy blue coat over my shoulders, my hands gripping the edge of the pew as if it were the only anchor in this strange, unreal moment. Michael avoided my gaze, standing stiffly beside Victoria, his expression unreadable. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the quiet swell around me, noticing the tiny details I had overlooked before, the silver cross at the front, the subtle glint of the stained glass catching the morning sunlight, the fold of my gloves in my lap. I did not move. I did not speak. Instead, I allowed my mind to drift back to the kitchen where he used to hum while making coffee, the smell of his cologne lingering even now on his chair. The tears that should have welled up stayed tucked behind the careful control I had practiced for years. I could see Victoria's reflection in the polished surface of the casket, her smile polite, but her eyes calculating. My mind traced the chain of events, the small acts of exclusion, the subtle commands over the past months that I had thought were mere quirks, now forming a pattern I could not ignore. Each whispered instruction she had given Michael about house arrangements, each gentle suggestion that I should consider a smaller living space, each casual remark about finances now read like lines from a play rehearsed over time. I did not flinch, although my heart tightened with the weight of betrayal. The room felt dense, the air thick with unspoken words and restrained sobs from distant relatives. I pictured the documents she would sign, the legal maneuvers she had planned, and I felt a calm clarity wash over me. I would not react impulsively. I would not be hurried by anger or grief. Instead, I would observe, catalog, and remember every gesture, every glance, every smirk. The echo of the organ was a steady pulse in the background as I folded my hands in my lap, my gaze steady on the polished floor, letting the reality of their intentions settle in like a quiet storm. I would hold my silence, but not my power. And even as the mourners passed, offering condolences I no longer registered, I stayed rooted, aware, calculating, aware that the first mistake they had made was underestimating the quiet patience of a woman who had spent a lifetime in measured observation, who understood the weight of history, of memory, and of the life she had built alongside the man now at rest before us all. The following morning, the house was quieter than it had been in weeks, sunlight filtering through the blinds in thin, golden lines across the living room carpet. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had cooled just enough to allow her to drink slowly, deliberately. Each sip was a meditation, a small act of grounding as she recalled the faint echoes of yesterday, the murmurs of the mourners, the quick glances, the whispered plans that had revealed far more than they intended. She traced the edge of the mug with a fingertip, noting the tiny chip in the rim, a remnant from years of everyday use, and felt a small, ironic smile tug at her lips. The living room smelled faintly of lilies, the same scent the florist had chosen, their fragrance lingering like a quiet memory in the air. Michael had left early, leaving Victoria to rearrange the furniture in subtle ways, positioning chairs closer to the windows, moving her own belongings into corners that had once been Eleanor's domain. Eleanor watched silently from the kitchen doorway, noting the angles and the shifts, every placement deliberate, every movement a statement she catalogued in her mind. She remembered the countless dinners she had prepared for them, the holidays she had orchestrated, the care with which she had nurtured not only her husband but the family as a whole. Each memory came with a pang of recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that some of the small kindnesses had been met with calculated indifference. Yet she did not allow bitterness to settle. Instead, she considered the patterns, the small deviations from what had been normal, the little hints that had whispered of intentions concealed behind politeness. Her gaze fell on the envelopes sitting on the counter, the letters she had gathered over the years, notes from her husband, documents about the house and the bank accounts, each a puzzle piece waiting for the proper arrangement. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of preparation and patience, knowing that action would come not with haste, but with precision. Eleanor poured another cup of coffee and placed it carefully on the table, her movements measured and deliberate, as if each motion was a declaration of her awareness. The morning passed with quiet observation. She moved through the house, noting the changes, cataloging each detail in her mind without a word, without confrontation. Even the silence of the empty rooms spoke volumes, echoing the absence of what she had once expected and now understood to be temporary illusions of family harmony. As the hours stretched, she allowed herself the smallest sense of control, knowing that awareness was her first and most powerful tool, that every choice she had made until now had led to this clarity. She would wait, she would watch, and when the time was right, the subtle currents she had been tracing would converge to reveal the full picture, and she would act with the calm, deliberate authority that had always been her quiet strength. The late afternoon light spilled across the living room, highlighting the subtle changes Victoria had made to the furniture placement, each chair and table angled with quiet intention. Eleanor moved through the rooms with careful steps, her eyes noting every small shift, the faint scuff of a shoe on the polished hardwood, the subtle rearrangement of photographs on the mantel. She paused at the window, watching the street outside where neighbors walked their dogs, oblivious to the tension held within these walls. The smell of fresh coffee lingered, a comforting contrast to the nervous energy she could sense emanating from Victoria in the kitchen. Eleanor remembered the countless Sunday dinners she had orchestrated, the care with which she had laid out every place setting, ensuring that the family felt welcome, seen, and cared for. Each memory now carried a different weight. The thought that some of her attentions had been received not with gratitude, but with calculation settled like a stone in her chest. She ran her fingers across the edge of a side table, feeling the smoothness of the wood, the small imperfection in the varnish, a reminder of years spent maintaining her home, preserving every corner with love and diligence. Eleanor moved to the bookshelf, scanning the titles, tracing the spines with her fingertips, recalling conversations had over coffee and shared afternoons with Michael and Victoria, conversations that now seemed laced with hidden motives she had only just begun to recognize. The clock ticked steadily, a metronome to her thoughts, each second reinforcing the need for patience, observation, and precise timing. She made her way to the dining room, noting the angles of light, the reflection on the polished surface of the table, each reflection a subtle hint of intentions and desires carefully cloaked in civility. Eleanor did not speak. She did not confront. She allowed herself to exist fully within the space, aware of every shadow, every shift in posture, every twitch of an eyebrow that betrayed more than words could say. Her mind replayed fragments of conversations, the subtle instructions Victoria had offered, the suggestions she had made about property, money, and family logistics, now cast in a new, revealing light. Eleanor sipped her coffee again, letting the warmth anchor her, the mundane act grounding her in the reality that she still held control over her responses, her choices, and the unfolding understanding of their true intentions. The day moved slowly, the outside world continuing in its rhythm, while inside, Eleanor cataloged, observed, and planned silently, the awareness of the family dynamics sharpening like a finely honed instrument, preparing for the moments when insight would give her the clarity to act with calm, deliberate purpose. As evening settled into the house, Eleanor moved through the hallways with measured steps, the soft light from the lamps casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. She paused briefly at the family photo wall, her fingers tracing the frames of her husband, Michael as a boy, and Victoria in more recent years, each smile now taking on a new, more complicated meaning. The quiet of the house was profound, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling structure. Yet it was in this quiet that Eleanor felt most alive, most aware. She walked into the study, noting the pile of unopened mail on the desk, the carefully arranged pens and notepads that Victoria had placed, each detail curated with subtle purpose. Eleanor opened the drawer, not to search for anything yet, but to feel the weight of her own agency in the space she had maintained for decades. She reflected on the rituals they had kept, the Sunday breakfasts, the holiday decorations, the birthday celebrations, and realized how meticulously she had preserved tradition even when it went unnoticed or unappreciated. Each act of care now felt like a strategic investment in the memory of her husband, in the dignity she still held within her own life. She poured herself a glass of water and carried it to the living room, seating herself in the armchair closest to the window, where the fading sunlight painted the room in a warm, golden glow. Her mind replayed small moments from the past week, the subtle exchanges at the funeral, the quiet suggestions, the careful orchestration of appearances, each one revealing a layer of intention she had only begun to decipher. Eleanor did not rush her observations. She cataloged them, storing details with the precision of someone who understood the value of patience and timing. She moved to the piano, lightly pressing the keys as she had done so often when alone, letting the familiar notes echo softly, a gentle rhythm that reminded her of continuity amidst disruption. As she listened to the sound fill the space, Eleanor allowed herself a sense of calm determination, the clarity that action would follow strategy, that her response would be measured and impactful. The day waned slowly, the shadows lengthening across the floor, and Eleanor remained seated, absorbing the nuances of the household, noting the subtle signs of presence and absence, and preparing mentally for the moments when awareness would become action. She understood that every gesture, every glance, every quiet maneuver was part of a larger picture, and she would meet it not with haste, but with deliberate understanding and quiet strength. Late in the afternoon, Eleanor sat at the small writing desk in the corner of the study, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light over the papers she had begun to organize. Each document, each envelope, represented a fragment of years of careful management, bills paid, accounts maintained, and letters exchanged, all forming a silent record of her diligence and responsibility. She traced the edges of a letter from her late husband, his handwriting delicate and precise, and allowed herself a brief, quiet smile at the memory of his voice reading it aloud on quiet evenings. The room was still, only the soft tick of the antique clock punctuating the quiet. But within that stillness, Eleanor felt a sense of clarity sharpening around her thoughts. She remembered conversations with Michael and Victoria, the subtle ways Victoria had positioned herself in the household, the suggestions that seemed innocent at first but had slowly revealed a pattern of self-interest over the past months. Eleanor cataloged each memory, each minor incident, as though arranging a map of intentions and actions, seeing clearly now the careful measures Victoria had taken to influence decisions and shift control. She sipped her tea, its warmth grounding her, and allowed her gaze to drift toward the window, where the late sunlight reflected off the glass, creating a patchwork of light on the floor. It reminded her of the years she had spent shaping the home into a place of warmth and tradition, of the countless meals she had prepared with love and thoughtfulness, moments that now took on the bittersweet weight of being unnoticed or unappreciated. Eleanor opened another envelope, a set of statements and receipts she had saved, and began to examine them with steady, deliberate attention. She did not rush. Each observation, each detail she recorded in her mind, contributed to a broader understanding of the environment and the people within it. The living room beyond the study door was quiet, chairs neatly arranged, the soft hum of the heating system filling the space with a low, steady rhythm. Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction in the order and awareness she maintained, understanding that patience and precise observation would provide her with the insight needed for the days ahead. The house seemed to settle around her, the weight of absence and memory intertwining with the gentle warmth of the lamp, and Eleanor allowed herself to imagine the careful steps she would take to address the intentions she had uncovered. She moved a small stack of papers slightly to align with the edge of the desk, the motion deliberate and precise, a reflection of the calm authority she carried within. As the shadows lengthened across the floor and the sky darkened outside, Eleanor remained poised and attentive, cataloging the nuances of the household, the subtle signs of movement and attention, preparing herself for the thoughtful actions she would take to reclaim not only clarity but also a measure of quiet control over the unfolding situation. The following morning, Eleanor rose with a sense of quiet determination, her movements deliberate as she prepared breakfast in the sunlit kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of lilies still lingering from the funeral arrangements, a soft reminder of yesterday's wait. She set the table with her finest china, each plate and cup placed with precision, her hands steady and controlled, reflecting the careful rhythm she maintained in her thoughts. Michael entered first, his expression neutral, eyes flicking briefly toward Victoria, who followed with a polished smile that did not reach her eyes. Eleanor observed them both silently, noting the small gestures, the way Victoria adjusted her scarf, the subtle shift of her posture, every movement a clue to her intentions. As they sat, Eleanor moved through the motions of breakfast, pouring juice and arranging toast, her voice calm and measured, carrying the ease of someone accustomed to managing the household with grace. She recalled the countless mornings spent with her husband, preparing meals and sharing quiet conversation, the memory providing both comfort and contrast to the current atmosphere. Each sip of coffee was deliberate, a moment to center herself, to let the awareness of their behaviors sink in fully. Eleanor noticed the way Michael hesitated over conversation, the careful pauses he took, and the slight tension in Victoria's smile, the subtle attempts to control the dialogue and shape the morning to their favor. She cataloged these nuances with care, each observation reinforcing the understanding she had been cultivating over the past days. Eleanor did not rush to speak, allowing the conversation to unfold while she quietly gauged their intentions, testing the currents of interaction with patient scrutiny. The sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the kitchen, and Eleanor felt a calm clarity within her, the realization that knowledge and observation provided more power than confrontation at this stage. She adjusted the napkins on the table, aligning them perfectly, a small act of control amidst uncertainty. Each detail of the morning, the placement of silverware, the gentle clink of china, the rhythm of conversation, was noted and remembered, a quiet accumulation of information that would guide her next steps. Eleanor sipped her tea again, letting the warmth anchor her, and watched as Victoria reached for the butter with a practiced hand, unaware that every action had been observed and catalogued. The day moved deliberately, the house alive with subtle tension and quiet observation, Eleanor's awareness serving as both shield and strategy, her patience and careful attention preparing her for the moments when subtle knowledge would transform into purposeful, measured action. By midday, the sunlight had shifted, streaming through the tall windows and casting a warm glow across the polished hardwood floors. Eleanor sat in her favorite chair in the living room, a leather armchair that had molded perfectly to her frame over the years, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The quiet was thick, almost tangible, allowing her to hear the soft shuffle of Victoria moving about the kitchen, arranging dishes and straightening the tablecloth, her movements meticulous but faintly hurried. Michael lingered near the doorway, casting occasional glances toward Eleanor, uncertain, as if measuring her reaction to every small gesture. Eleanor let herself observe without interruption, noticing the subtle shifts in posture, the way Victoria's fingers lingered on certain objects longer than necessary, the slight tilt of her head as she spoke with measured politeness, a cadence Eleanor had come to recognize as strategic. She recalled years of orchestrating family events, the care she had taken in every meal, every holiday, every shared moment, and she realized with quiet clarity that these acts had been both gestures of love and unintentional lessons in observation, patience, and discernment. Eleanor sipped her coffee, letting the warmth anchor her thoughts, and allowed herself to map the room in her mind, noting every chair, every framed photograph, every reflection in the glass surfaces that might reveal intent or emotion. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, a metronome to the silent unfolding of awareness that Eleanor maintained, each second reinforcing the deliberate calm she embodied. She considered the conversations, the gentle suggestions, and the small insistences Victoria had made in past weeks, the careful alignment of her actions to influence Michael and the household subtly but persistently. Eleanor cataloged each of these with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime paying attention to nuance, understanding that the smallest gestures often revealed the largest truths. The afternoon continued with this rhythm, Eleanor observing, cataloging, and reflecting, while Victoria continued her orchestrations, unaware that each action was being silently noted and assessed. The interplay of light and shadow across the room seemed to mirror the subtle dynamics of intention and perception, and Eleanor remained steady, grounded, and fully aware of the currents beneath the surface. She understood that patience and observation were her allies, that the house, the memories, and the documents she had kept were instruments in her silent strategy, and that the unfolding hours provided both insight and preparation. Eleanor sipped again, placed the cup gently on the side table, and leaned back, letting the quiet of the home and the methodical flow of awareness cultivate within her a sense of readiness, a composed anticipation of the precise moment when insight would translate into measured, deliberate action, ensuring that her presence and understanding would shape the outcome without haste or display. As evening approached, Eleanor walked slowly through the rooms of the house, the fading sunlight casting long, warm shadows across the floors. She paused at the doorway to the dining room, noticing the way the light caught the edges of the polished table, the silverware neatly arranged, and the folded napkins perfectly aligned. Victoria moved about quietly, her steps soft against the hardwood, her eyes momentarily meeting Eleanor's, a flash of uncertainty there that Eleanor cataloged and stored for later reflection. Michael lingered near the hallway, his posture tense yet restrained, his glances flicking toward both women, measuring reactions with careful attention. Eleanor let the scene unfold, her movements deliberate as she placed a small stack of letters onto the desk in the study, each envelope a fragment of record, a testament to years of responsibility and care. She recalled the morning rituals, the careful planning of meals, the moments of laughter and shared conversation, and she recognized now how the smallest gestures carried more significance than she had initially understood. Each action Victoria took, each subtle suggestion or adjustment, was observed with precision, cataloged as part of a larger pattern Eleanor had begun to understand. She poured herself a cup of tea, its warmth grounding her as she moved to the living room, settling into the armchair by the window. The soft glow of the lamp beside her highlighted the fine lines of her face, evidence of decades of experience, observation, and resilience. She watched the interplay of light and shadow across the room, noting the reflections in the windows and the slight shimmer of polished surfaces, each detail feeding into her understanding of the dynamics around her. Eleanor's thoughts traced past conversations, small interactions, and moments of seeming inconsequence, now revealed to be laden with intention and subtle influence. She did not rush to respond, instead allowing herself the space to observe, measure, and internalize every nuance. The house remained quiet except for the distant hum of the heating system, the subtle creaks of settling wood, and the occasional soft rustle of Victoria moving about. Eleanor felt the calm strength of knowledge, the quiet power of patience, and the clarity that came from careful attention to detail. As the day drew to a close, the long shadows of evening stretching across the floors, Eleanor remained seated, fully present and aware, cataloging every subtle gesture, every shift in posture, every unspoken communication, knowing that the insight she had cultivated would guide her measured, deliberate action when the time was right. She sipped her tea once more, the warmth a reminder of her steadiness, and allowed herself to appreciate the quiet control she maintained, the awareness that in this stillness, she held the power to shape the unfolding narrative with clarity, patience, and the calm authority that had defined her life. The evening had deepened into a quiet night, the sky outside painted with the faint glow of streetlights, their reflection casting long shadows across the living room floor. Eleanor sat in her armchair by the window, a blanket draped over her lap, the warmth of her tea lingering in her hands. She observed the subtle movements within the house, Victoria tidying the last of the day's clutter with precise, almost deliberate care, Michael moving quietly from room to room, checking on small details as if testing the boundaries of her awareness. Eleanor did not interrupt, she did not react, but she cataloged every nuance, every subtle shift in energy, every flicker of hesitation or intentional gesture. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the antique clock, and the occasional creak of the settling floors filled the silence, each sound anchoring her in the reality of the household she had maintained for decades. She traced the edges of a photograph on the mantel, the image of her husband, smiling warmly during a summer picnic, and she allowed herself a quiet moment of remembrance, the memory reinforcing her determination to act with care and precision rather than haste. Eleanor reflected on the delicate balance of patience and observation, understanding that every gesture she had noted over the past days, from the subtle adjustments of Victoria's posture to the careful alignment of objects around the house, was part of a larger narrative waiting to be addressed at the right moment. She sipped her tea again, the warmth steadying her resolve, and allowed her mind to map the interactions and intentions, connecting the dots that had become visible through attentive observation. The shadows of the room lengthened as the night deepened, yet Eleanor remained alert, her senses attuned to the smallest signals of change in the environment, every detail cataloged and remembered. She moved slowly to the desk, arranging the letters and documents in a methodical sequence, each one a piece of evidence, a fragment of understanding that would guide her in the coming days. The house felt alive in its quiet, each creak, each soft sound, a part of the larger rhythm that Eleanor had long since learned to read and interpret. She allowed herself a deep, controlled breath, feeling the calm clarity of strategy and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering patience and attention. Eleanor's gaze returned to the window, watching the moonlight settle across the yard, the familiar outlines of trees and fences sharp and clear in the silvery glow. In that moment, she understood the power of measured observation, the quiet authority that comes from clarity and preparation, and she allowed herself the satisfaction of knowing that when the time arrived, she would act with precision, calm, and an unwavering sense of purpose that no subtle maneuver or hidden intent could disrupt.